one of the ways of speaking about awakening is to speak to that what effectively speaking is given progressively to the light of greater awareness. So that what would comprise the full gamut of homecoming or full gamut of spiritual realization slash recognition. Because that spiritual realization and recognition is inseparable from bringing forth layers and levels of that what prior to that have been shredded in darkness as the realm of the unconscious. So this is the job of awakened life force.
Yeah, it's like the last few years I was pendling between like this bliss and utter darkness. It has a lot to do with the disease I just went through and still are going through. And it feels like those are two kind of shores or something, but actually they are one and they need to be brought together and need to function as one in a way. And it is also something energetic. If I look at my body, I was also working a lot with therapists on that. And I located this as kind of a great contraction here in my iliopsoas. Often have some back pain because of that. And I think even the inflammation in my intestines, which is the disease, is related to that. It's just completely stuck energy, hold back energy in a way, and it has kind of something dark, this energy. I mean, we made some dream travelings with a therapist I really appreciate a lot. He's working very delicate and he's very good. And it showed up when, I mean, first we went through like Bliss gardens and things like this. It's very easy for me to connect to this quality, to that bliss and to that, but I don't want to run away from something that wants to be integrated. And so he kind of led me to this. He said, yeah, okay, you can connect quite good to that. Maybe it has some karmic reasons or some, but now let's look at the shadow. Let's look at the more darker things. And there was a cloudy setting, and there was a dragon showing up, like a mighty dragon, in his eyes anger and pure terrifying power. And I tried to get more in contact with that, and as soon as I went closer to him, he just dived into the sea or whatever was under the clouds, and he just ran away. And I feel the deep need that this needs to be integrated, and I'm very overwhelmed of how to do it. And I made myself a lot of thoughts about how to express that. I wrote things down, and I'm not sure if I could somehow transport what is processing me, but maybe I hoped maybe you have something helpful to say on that.
Well, in a way, we could have begun this evening with something more straightforward. I could have started with the fact that it's a summer solstice today, right? June 21st, summer solstice. Today is June 21st, is summer solstice. Also, International Day of Yoga. Happy Yoga Day, everyone. So it's a kind of like a fitting reminder here. In what way? And in what way this is relevant to what you have shared just now? There are many definitions of yoga. Yoga itself is, of course, defined and translated as that what unites, it's union, yoga. Yog. Yoga is an anglicized way of pronouncing. In fact, it's yog, which is at the root of the English term, English verb to yoke. It's archaic word, seldom used today, but still it's in the vernacular. To yoke is to bring together, to yoke. And it goes straight back to Sanskrit. Yog. Yoga is that. Yoga is that what unites. Yoga could be spoken of in terms of noun and verb, both. But there are many definitions of what is yoga. And these definitions, and I'm not talking about different types of yoga. I'm not talking about yoga nidra versus karma yoga versus, right? I'm not talking about this now. I'm talking about how there are some principal ways of how yoga is defined. And even in the culture where that term comes from, it has been defined and over millennia in different ways where the emphasis was made on something as opposed to something else, just taking, let's say, different approaches. Like Hatha Yoga is a union of the Ha and Tha, right? The union of the soul and the luna. In Patanjali Yoga, the yoga is defined in a different way. Yoga is through the disunion. So in Patanjali Yoga, for example, yog or yoga is actually defined through disunion, through discrimination. Viyoga, there's a Sanskrit term. Viyoga. And Viyoga is to be considered to be a true meaning of yoga. Because in Patanjali system, it is adherent to the philosophy of Samkhya, where the separation from spirit, from nature, is a prerequisite, is a job, so as to abide in total freedom from the binding influence of all the gunas, with which the Mother Nature operates, let's say, using that language. But there is something interesting here as a proposition, which also comes across, again, speaking in terms of the scriptural references in the Bhagavad Gita, when yoga is defined. And of course, the Bhagavad Gita deals with several yogas. There's like each chapter is a yoga, right? Starting with Arjuna Vishada Yoga, which is the yoga of the despondency of Arjuna. So the first yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, of the 12 chapters, the first chapter is the yoga of the despondency, the state which considered to be a prerequisite for the unfoldment of the knowledge and truth, which is no longer subjected to the, let's say, domain of that what we spoke just now earlier, of do's and don'ts and logic and all the rest of it, rationale. Because we know that Arjuna's predicament there is irreconcilable at his level of consciousness yet, because he is torn between the duty and what the calling of the heart. As a warrior, he is torn between his duty to basically to stand up and do his job for what he's been trained, but witnessing the state of affairs on a battlefield where he recognizes dear faces in the army which is now standing as his enemy. So his heart is torn. He is in this very deep state of distress, not confusion. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi very clearly in his expositions on the Bhagavad Gita redefined this in his historical translations, which goes back to the 60s, that there were repeated misinterpretation of these very early verses of the Gita that somehow portray Arjuna as man of confusion, someone who is just like lost and doesn't know what to do. No, contrary to that, it shows the man of the highest level of evolution. It shows the man of highest state of evolvement. His intellect is resolute and his heart is resolute. The conflict simply is where he finds himself, is how to reconcile the two. So for the yoga to proceed, first the yoga of the Arjuna Vishada yoga, in other words, the despondency is required. So that act of despondency is exemplified by great warrior sitting down, putting his bow. You can just imagine, right? Like cinematically even, right? It's very, I could see how Kurosawa would have treated that, right? Great, mighty warrior with his strong arms putting this, not involved. I'm not getting into the fight. I'm done. And then from that moment, Krishna begins to speak. So the next yoga proceeds from there. And there are many, many yogas proceed from there, from karma yoga to the yoga of meditation, right? To the yoga of the jnana, to the highest knowledge. But there are also these same allusions that we have encountered in the Patanjali system, that yoga is defined as disunion first. You see? Why that is? And this is what is for you to make this connection here, just as have been suggested, that it would be fitting also today to speak to that. It's a kind of on the occasion. And gives us an opportunity also to revisit this topic of what is yoga, how can it be defined? Union. But it can also be defined from its opposite. Because what is union? When does the requirement for union comes? Only when there is a disunion. But here it's spoken of in terms of the prerequisite. Prerequisite in a sense that before yoga or before union, there has to be discrimination. First, there has to be disunion. So there's a conscious act of dissemblance, discrimination. Hence that term is used. Viyoga stands before the yoga. You see? How does that relate to what you have shared and what you brought? It is for you to make these final insights. But what I want to bring as a reminder is there is no way to draw a line where we could say up to what point these forces that in the horizontal plane of life, even at the subtler planes of life, stand in opposition to each other, are being met and dealt with. We cannot define with certainty where we have been able to reconcile all these dragons that will rear their heads only to dive deep down into the murky waters of the unconscious. So, perhaps a helpful understanding or a pointer or a reminder that the premise upon this work unfolds is that human psyche in itself is the embodiment of the entirety of creation. Whatever can be found in the universe can be found in this body. It's one of the axioms of Tantra. It's one of the tantric exclamations. Whatever is out there is certainly in here. Not that I want to now contradict myself and go start fishing for some scientific validation, but it just simply feels fitting to bring this to our attention, that what is really startling in the field of cosmology, that there is this, still could be considered as a presupposition, that whatever chemical compounds can be found anywhere in the universe, these compounds exist in the human body. So in other words, what's interesting, whenever there is some kind of object, some meteor, some meteorite, something that came from extraterrestrial space and fell onto the planet Earth, when it was examined, some very, very unusual element maybe was found in it. I don't know, don't hold me. I will just say something probably total bogus, but molybden, I don't know. I don't know where it came from. It's just like, whatever that, from, in other words, the whole table of Mendeleev. Are you familiar with that? Table of Mendeleev. Mendeleev. I don't know pronunciation. Anyone can help me? Mendeleev table. All the elements are ordered, yeah, all pharaoh, like all of the elements. He was a Russian biologist, his subject was chemistry, and he's, like the table of Pythagoras, for example, right? Pythagorean table is kids use in order to multiply and divide very quickly, because it shows a complete and utter relationship between the numbers. This is another table, not exactly, it's more complex, but there is a table of Mendeleev. In that table of Mendeleev, the whole composite of all chemical compounds, and it's interesting, whatever comes from outer space doesn't bring anything new. Everything already exists within the planet Earth because we are cosmic dust. As plain as that. We are cosmic dust. So at that level, you see, understanding this from the psychological point of view as well, it's not if that is at the level of the biochemistry, so much so that should be relevant to the psychological makeup of what makes us into human beings, which means totally cosmic being, which means in turn that we comprise the entirety of all mythologies, of all creatures, of all dragons, of all alligators and crocodiles, macaras and phantasmagoric creatures that have ever came and graced any lore of any civilization gone by, is here. Fact. Here, always, within each and every one of us, as that background, as the whatever we may want to call it. The same is true to the entire sphere and spheres upon spheres of angelic heavenly realms. That's what we are. Metaphysically speaking, we can speak of ourselves in terms of that whole, let's say, Dante Alighieri's Inferno and, in his Divine Comedy. It's all within. All within. The system of the chakras can also be spoken in terms of that understanding. These psychic centers are only spoken of in terms of their conceptual framework with which to navigate spiritual unfoldment. We can decide how many we can speak of. There are psychic centers that protrude downward from Muladhara into the realm of Patala, the realm of the underworld. There are psychic realms. They are not, of course, not psychic in the sense of, let's say, elementary order of and the beyond of the pure categories of tattvas, but they protrude like this crown into heaven. And you've seen these drawings in Buddhist, Hindu-based iconography. So there's like not just Sahasrara and bust, but still there's some build-up. So where does that leave us? What am I pointing here? Is for you to put this together. My suggestion simply is that we can't catch the crocodile or the dragon. It's a waste of time, in fact. The job is not to go under this or that creature. You see? A real understanding is that we are a conglomerate of everything, of light and darkness. Everything. We are a totality of existence. And within this totality, there are consciously made choices, as well as that what is beyond the capacity of these consciously made choices, where the spiritual work progresses from. Awakening can be spoken of also in terms of this anatomy of the process. So we could speak about awakening in terms of so many different ways of how we can give it to the language. One of the ways of speaking about awakening is to speak to that what effectively speaking is given progressively to the light of greater awareness. So that what would comprise the full gamut of homecoming or full gamut of spiritual realization / recognition. Because that spiritual realization and recognition is inseparable from bringing forth layers and levels of that what prior to that have been shredded in darkness as the realm of the unconscious. So this is the job of awakened life force. Because when life force is awakened, it begins to flush out of the system all that what remained unconscious. And we simply become more conscious, more and more conscious. So the job is not to go after crocodiles. We don't do the Indiana Jones here. We don't go jungle crocodile hunting, none of that. It's a different approach, has to be understood from get-going. Not to undermine anyone's therapeutic professions and jobs. People do fantastic work and everyone comes from their level of understanding, all due respect to them. But the work is not here to go after certain, what could be here understood as manifestation of some disease, some illness, something that physiology is affected by, and by somehow assuming that locating that what is you in your sharing, you called going after the shadow, allocating what this could be a reflection of. And then in no time, the dragon begins to show its face, only to fizzle away, only to disappear. You see? Is not the approach that I would recommend when it comes to proper spiritual work. It's not what you ought to be doing. This is highly speculative and uncertain job. You see? Very, very uncertain. Whereas contemplating, reflecting on this, the totality of who we are, when we have a healthy, in a sense, healthy, also, let's redefine this so we don't end up with some assumptions making. What do we mean healthy versus unhealthy? It requires straightforwardness and courage to acknowledge any tendency, anything that rises, anything that shows itself up. Indeed, in the form, in dreams, it can present us with insights that might make us feel uncomfortable there and then. And this, at this very moment, whenever we feel uncomfortable about something, it requires an act of courage to acknowledge it fully. Because when we're uncomfortable, we want to turn our gaze away. But that's where the subtle line between gazing at something, going after something, versus acknowledging it. Do you see what I'm trying to say in terms of why is it different? Why is it different going after some particular shadowy aspects in our personality, in our substratum of that psychic setup, versus when things present themselves, acknowledge them fully, acknowledge everything that otherwise societally already have stigma on, already, acknowledging this fully. This what it means to be conscious. Conscious. You see? There's a great thing in inevitably all this slips into the popular culture. Hollywood, not an exception. Why would it? Of course it would. Are you familiar with the Marvel series and Doctor Strange? Remember? When the very first one, Doctor Strange, right? When what's this British actor who played Doctor Strange? Yes, Benedict Cumberbatch. When he's, after he's lost his capacity to brilliance of being the best surgeon, he's suddenly, right, disabled. His hands cannot do anything, so he goes and search for rehabilitating his capacities, and right in Kathmandu, and that encounter with that master played by Tilda Swinton, right, another British actor, a great actress. There is this line that she says there in the movie when there's this exchanges, and of course she manages to convince him by directly showing him his limitations, right, and like his ego and that and all this, and there is this line that she utters, like when she wants to define what makes a being of light different as opposed to any other being. And she makes it crystal clear and very simple and very down to earth. The same absolutely as everyone else, but just slightly above all this, what presents itself as unconscious and remaining at that level vigilantly. I'm paraphrasing. So in other words, it's just a touch level above. just hovering above so as not to be succumbed to it all. That's all the difference it makes. That's what makes the world of difference. It's a waste of time to play saint and try to have saintly thoughts and, no, this is dangerous. Whenever we come to saints, listen to the Leonard Cohen song, You Want It Darker. Great reminder. Because if someone is saying, I'm a sinner, you see, the polarity has to play itself out. If someone is here pure, someone is immediately impure. There is instantaneously, this has to be employed. So therefore, the definition of the sage given by that role, played by Tilda Swinton, it's remaining above, knowing for what it is. You see, still having all these same temptations, everything, the full gamut. In fact, more, because there's more consciousness. More consciousness means you are more open to everything. But being able to be above of that and remain vigilant and doing everything from a place of being conscious. I just brought this as a reminder simply because this, what meant to serve here, in terms of what is it really boils down to. So otherwise, the fullness of that structure is here. The fullness of it here, everything. Just as in the aforementioned Bhagavad Gita, the Kurukshetra is meant to be applied to the human drama. All these forces face each other in opposition in that whatever hour is what is the work is about. And then that battlefield unfolds from there, it begins. The epic unfolds there. So it is applicable, Kurukshetra here literally means one's field. The field out there, but also field in here. You see? So whatever you make out of that. So whatever we are subjected physiologically here, you see, there is also this reminders. Yes, we're going through a life, and oftentimes we are faced with some challenges. Some challenges can be reflected through and lived through more through the way the physiology is being subjected. In others, perhaps the physiology is less affected, much less affected, the physiology much more robust, but one is given suffering in another domain and dimension of life. But no one is spared. No one is spared. Everyone fights their own battle. Everyone. Just if we open up and look in closely enough, everyone is dealing with something. It's just physiologically, it's obvious. When the body is like this area, that area begins to communicate something, it's very obvious. There's nothing you can do about it in terms of you cannot ignore it, you cannot run away from it. When we are tormented emotionally, psychologically, it's less obvious. You see? It's less obvious, but the suffering is just as much, if not more. Who knows? Who is to judge? How can this be compared? Someone who has a wrenching, pains in the gut or in any other part of the body, would they trade that for other pains? We don't know. In the moment, maybe they will. But what this points out to, also spoken as a reminder, in terms of that disunion, everything that is here experienced, everything that is experienced, to be recognized for what it is, in terms of that what caused the original loss of union. So therefore the viyoga here is spoken as a prerequisite. You see? So it's spoken of here as that what proceeds towards the, we could say, greater union through that discrimination. You see? But other than that, I would reconsider doing this like dragon hunting, shadow work, because there's no end. At what point will we say that we have faced all the dragons? At what point? See? So this is why the premise in this work is that we work with light, work with consciousness as awareness, not shying away from anything that rises in the field, acknowledging, holding that in acknowledgement, and not getting sidetracked. Everything. And the dreams can be great source of this, like that kind of, at the level of symptomatology. Just point something that troubles you and you are not fully recognizing. So it comes through the dream, it communicates in that realm. Because it can show itself in the realm of waking state of consciousness somehow. Somehow we not allow ourselves. But in the dream, that disallowance is lifted. And it shows itself, and sometimes in an ugly way. See? So the dreams here herald freeing of that. So there are no good or bad dreams. Yes, we could speak of some dreams are more pleasant than others. But every dream is a freeing of some kind of stress, freeing of some kind of imposition. See? We may wake up and we feel like touched by grace, like almost feel elevated. And this, but other times we wake up and feel mucky, feel gross, grossed by content of our dream. But it's a blessing there and then, because something surfaced itself. You see? It brought into awareness. It's a celebratory moment. It's much worse when it's lurking in darkness. The contours and shapes are not clear to us. It's much worse. Have you noticed, all of you, whenever there is a horror movie, that the scariest part is before the monster shows its head. The scariest part is before you see the monster, before you see the creature. Once the creature showed its head, it becomes either ridiculous or hilarious or ugly, disgusting. But up on the moment it shows itself is the scariest, because the imagination is then open to everything. This is why, like squeaking of the door and that sliver of into the, like played by filmmakers, Once the alien, like when the alien in that classical Aliens, whatever, how many, trilogy or how many of them were, 4, I don't remember. Ridley Scott. Who remembers this Alien? Remember? Once you see the alien, it's like, okay, it's ugly like hell, but it's not scary anymore. So that.